like to welcome you all to the school committee meeting in Burlington for September 19th, 2019. We had to change our date this week because of the snowstorm on Tuesday and the ice. And first we can say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the warrant. I would entertain a motion. Thank you.
Madam Chair, before we entertain the motion, because we are short some members this evening, I'm going to read the rule of necessity, which reads as follows. As you know, since the immediate family members of two school committee members are teachers, the committee cannot reach a quorum due to conflicts under the Conflict of Interest Law. We have been advised by counsel to invoke the rule of necessity to allow us to vote on any matter involving the financial interests of such family members when necessary, and by this statement are invoking the rule. Detailed disclosures regarding the matter were made at the committee's April 11, 2006 meeting and recorded in the minutes, and are also on file with the town clerk and may be viewed in the town clerk's office.
Thank you. And so do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The chair vote abstain, and the chair votes aye. So that's 2-0-0. No, 3-0-0. Can't count. Okay. All right. And now I'd like to change the order of tonight's agenda so that we can hear from our Burlington High School Poet Laureate who's here tonight, Michaela Ganair. Welcome, and please come on up. I don't know, Dr. Conti, if you have anything else. I was unable to come to Poetry Out Loud this year and disappointed, but I'm just thrilled to have you here tonight. So please.
No, again, thank you, Madam Chair. As the committee knows, we are honored every year to have the Poet Laureate come and recite the poem that one of the two that they recited at the finals. Poetry Out Loud, I think, is one of the programs that distinguishes Burlington High School. All of our students, through their English classes, through the English department, need to memorize and recite a poem. And those recitations continue, and they conclude with a Poetry Out Loud event that is to a full auditorium. And all of the poets, I think, just did a remarkable job, which even makes Michaela's performance even more spectacular. So it's really our honor, our pleasure to listen to you tonight. So if you want to just come on up front and center, and we'd love to hear your poem, and then we'll get a picture with the committee. And
Should we have her sit at the microphone so people can
do you want to sit or stand? Which is better for you?
I prefer to stand.
So maybe I can move the chairs. You can stand right in front of the table, if that's okay.
And then people who are watching on BCAT can hear you as well.
And don't even worry about the mic. It'll pick it up.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you also for having me. I love to perform. I love the poems that I chose. So tonight I'm going to be performing More Lies by Karen Gottsched. Sometimes I say I'm going to meet my sister at the cafe, even though I have no sister, just because it's such a beautiful thing to say. I've always thought so, ever since I read a novel in which two sisters were constantly meeting in cafes. Today, for example, I walked alone on the wet sidewalk, wearing my rain boots, expecting someone might ask me where I was headed. I bought a steno pad and a watch battery. The store windows fogged up. Rain in April is a sort of promise, and it costs nothing. I carried a bag of books to the cafe and ordered tea. I like a place that's lit by lamps. I like a place where you can hear people talk about small things, like the difference between azure and cerulean, and the price of tulips. It's going down. I watched someone who could be my sister walk in, shaking the rain from her hair. I thought even now, florists are filling their coolers with tulips, $5 a bundle. All over the city, there are sisters. Any one of them could be mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Michaela, you have some folks with you,
Yes.
so
Do you have a sister with you?
I didn't
One.
write the poem. It's a poem about a girl who desperately wants to have a sister and desperately wants that connection because she's read about the magic in it and how important it is to her. So I do have a sister, and she does mean that much to me, so I definitely related to the importance of having that person.
It's wonderful.
Fantastic.
so thank you so much. Would you mind
Thank-
taking a picture with the
yeah.
committee? Just right in front here, maybe come up.
Senior.
You have plans for next year? Not that you have to, I'm just wondering.
Well, I got accepted to my first college today.
Oh, congratulations.
University of Albany.
Ah,
Maybe there.
That's perfect. Fantastic. Congratulations, Mom.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, yeah. Are you going to major in theater arts or?
Thank you again for
Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You stole mine.
No, it was there. I just left it, and you weren't here. You weren't here, so I left it there. Okay. Okay, well, that was lovely. Delighted. The next item on the agenda is public participation, and I'd like to know if there's anyone in the audience who would like to say something. Okay, nobody here today for that. And our student representative, because of the change in date, wasn't able to come tonight, so she's not here. And I don't know, are there any subcommittee reports tonight?
No.
Just the guidelines, which we'll get to later.
It's on the
Okay.
agenda, so.
All right. Actually, there was a wellness committee, subcommittee meeting that I'll report on. At our last wellness committee meeting, there was a discussion about Parent University, and people may have wondered, we didn't have one this fall, and that was because in the few years that we had the Parent University, the turnout wasn't that large, and the Wellness Committee's been looking into ways to make it more accessible for people. And we're going to move to more of a model, or try a model, which is more like when the BEF, the Burlington Education Foundation, works with the schools and puts together speakers, brings in speakers and workshops for the community, for parents and such. So we're going to try that kind of a model going forward. The Wellness Committee is reviewing currently the YRBS from last spring, and as soon as those reports are ready, they will come and present to the school committee. We have a subcommittee working on the high school report and a subcommittee working on the middle school report. And there was also a comment, because correct me if I didn't get this quite right, but my understanding is that with the new schedule at the high school next year, where they're going to change their blocks to different lengths, there will be an advisory as part of that rotating cycle in the week. And that advisory will include many of what we call the social emotional type of issues, but it would also have other non-academic categories like financial literacy. And I was really pleased to hear that, because I know in our academically focused curriculum, we often are like, well, so how do you learn? Well, this shows my age, how do you keep a checkbook? Because I'm not sure anybody under 20 keeps a checkbook anymore. But how do you manage credit cards and how do you manage those kind of real-life financials? It doesn't come out in an algebra class, so I was really pleased that that's going to be part of it. So that was the Wellness Committee subcommittee report. And are there other subcommittee reports from other areas? Okay. Does the Ways and Means Subcommittee have any report for us tonight that's not part of the other discussions on the agenda? Okay, thank you so much. And in terms of announcements, does anyone have any other announcements to make?
No.
So we'll be talking about this sort of an aside, but I actually think that I want to announce for people who don't know, we did get the letter from the MSBA that says that they will not be supporting our project to renovate Burlington High School. And despite the fact that I think we all expected that, I'm still incredibly disappointed. Burlington High School needs to be renovated, and so we're going to need to spend a lot of time talking about it and working on it, and figuring out how we're going to manage that, and, you know, talk to people in town, get, you know, people to work together, because we know it'll be more expensive than if the state had helped us, although I do like to think about it in terms of we really don't need to tear down the high school and build a new one. So we aren't talking about $200 million. We're talking more in the $75 million range, I think, for the full project. There's discussions about doing part of the project. But I did want to publicly make sure that anybody who had not yet heard knew that we will not be supported by the MSBA, the Massachusetts State Building Authority, to help fund the high school renovation. Did you want to add anything to that?
I think I said this at the last meeting, Madam Chairman, but I think it was 8 years in a row now, Aaron?
Yeah.
Yes.
8 years in a row, this project's been denied. And they're going to continue to deny it until they change the legislation, because the legislation is drafted to favor communities that don't take good care of their schools and to favor communities that are really facing enrollment problems. So I think that we need to come up with a Plan B for the high school and put together a proposal for the MSBA in the spring for whatever elementary, maybe not this spring, but whatever elementary project we agree on. And I think that the town understands on the financial side that they're going to have to fit this into their bonding schedule in some way, shape, or form. But I think it's probably going to be paid off. Is it 10 or 20 years on our own bond? It would be 20 years, wouldn't it, Bob?
I think it depends, sorry,
I mean, we can,
I don't exactly know, but it depends what Brian wants to do. I think he has short-term bans and then longer ones, and I think the state allows different periods of time for different types of
Yeah.
projects. So I know, like parking lots, you can only bond for so long. Buildings might be 30 years, is that what I think?
Yeah.
At
So,
least
so,
20.
I think it's at least 20, maybe 30. So,
so,
I mean, that's the good news. We can spread it out like a home mortgage and pay it off without worrying about overrides or exclusions or things of that nature. So it's bad news, but it's not, as most people know, it's not unexpected. So, thank you.
Mrs. Monaco, yeah.
Yes, I agree with Steve. I think based on the input that we got from the parents at a recent committee meeting and based on the report that we've been rejected again for the high school, it seems to me there are two logical steps to go forward. And I'm not sure how you approach it if you come up with ideas, you hire engineers. I'm not, I don't know how to do it. But what we need to do, there's two things. One is we need to make a plan on how to approach the high school in how many, is it one big project? Is it 2, 3 projects? We need a plan, and we may need help in developing that plan. And the other thing we need to do is evaluate, and this will take some sort of an engineering study, whether or not we're able to build on the Pine Glen site, whether it's add on, tear down, rebuild, whatever. It was pretty obvious that parents in the community would like to have 4 sites. And until we know whether or not we can use the Pine Glen site for any more than what's there, we have to find that out. So my suggestion would be that over the next few months, we do what we have to do, whether it's warrant articles to get the money to evaluate these things, or whatever the right approach is. Those are the two things that need to get done next.
So, and I think we do have the elementary space needs on the agenda later, so we can
I thought it was with this one.
refer a little bit more to that. So, is there anything else, Dr. Conti, that you wanted to add on that?
No, I think later on the agenda, we'll get
Okay.
get into more detail, but I agree with everything that has been said by
Next thing
Mr.
on the agenda.
Nelson and
Yeah,
Mrs. Monaco.
yeah, they're together, aren't they?
It's the next thing on the agenda.
Well, this was under announcements. Oh, I see,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
poet laureate is, okay. I was kind of separating so that the high school is one project and then the elementary, and they are related in terms of, you know, looking at the next 10 years in bonding and all that kind of thing. So you had mentioned, Dr. Conti, something about wanting to, is there something about the bid price that you were going to update us for the high school? Because of the warrant we had,
Well, again, I think just to echo what Mr. Nelson said, this was our 8th attempt. I think that someone could say, were the attempts not well made? And I think every time we've contacted the MSBA for feedback on our proposal, they said our proposal was well done. They said it was aligned with what our needs were. I think you both, or all three of you, have participated in multiple visits when the MSBA has come out. I think they recognize the need. So I don't think there's anything other than we're not meeting their criteria, and the MSBA doesn't have their prioritization, and they don't have enough funding to fund every project that's in the pipeline. They typically get, I think this year they got 85 projects, and they're funding, again, another 10 to 15, and so there's always communities that are left out. We just happen to be left out over time. The high school needs renovation both programmatically in terms of classrooms and science labs especially, and I think in terms of their operating systems, which is not a surprise to anybody. I think we did have a warrant article last May for design work done on the mechanicals, the HVAC system. Bob is working through that, and Bob can give some more detail on where we are on that. I think we should actually have we have the expertise. I believe we need to talk about the heating and cooling of the high school. I don't think we have the expertise to talk about the learning space, the science labs, the classrooms, or everything else like that. So we probably need to, Mrs. Monaco, as you were saying, write a request for proposal for some design and engineering support to look at both remodeling the high school classroom space and to answer questions like the committee has about Pine Glen site and what some of the configurations could be, whether another building could even fit concurrently on the Pine Glen site, whether it would be an addition. We need someone who's an expert in that area to do that. So we need to write a request for a proposal. We did ask the town, because it's possible for us to work under a proposal that the town had written for design services. We could also work with that designer, but currently the town does not have an active outside architect or outside engineer under contract. So we're going to have to submit our own. In terms of the cost, I think the cost could vary, but I think we need to get the RFP done to figure out what the cost will be. And if it's significant, we probably need to write that into a warrant for Maytown meeting and spend some money on some design, not only in the high school, but I think use that person to also help us with answer some of the questions that came about regarding the elementary school. So I think we're all right there. I think the first thing we needed to know is that we weren't supported, which we, since our last meeting, have found out. And now we'll be in the process of writing that out. I do want Bob just to give a brief update on where we are with the warrant article regarding the HVAC system of the high school, because he's making some progress there. And again, that's one part of the high school renovation. I understand it's not all of it, but we have spent some resources looking at that. So with that, Bob, turn it over to you.
So there's two phases that I've been currently looking at. Actually, I'm gonna say a third one is working with the town accountant and the town procurement officer about potentially going out to a combined RFP, looking at a new engineer and/or a designer. But as far as the HVAC warrant that we asked for, we have a preliminary engineer that had put some specs together that is redoing those specs right now at no cost. That is not going to give us the full design specs, so that is something that we would have to additionally look for either RFP to move further with that. Another thing that we're considering is performance contracting. So there are a couple of companies that what they'll do is come in and they'll offer an assessment where they look at our current system, design a new system that would replace it, but then also project for us anywhere from a 10 to 15-year project cost where we would see some savings on the new equipment, but then obviously have to pay for the difference of that if we couldn't cover it. So similar to a company coming in saying, hey, we'll replace your windows, and the money that you save in your energy costs would pay for the new windows. So what we're saying is this company could come in and say, all right, it's gonna cost you $20 million to put a new building in. That's a made-up number. So for example, $20 million, but over the next 20 years, we project and promise in writing that you'll save 200 grand a year. Now, that 200 grand a year over 20 years doesn't pay for the full $20 million, but that helps us calculate, okay, well, the money that we save plus the monthly payment would be offset by that savings, and then projected over 20 years, that would be the new system cost.
Interesting.
We have done something like that before in the past. The town has done things like that before in the past as well, too. It's really just two different ways of looking at it, whether we want to bond something ourselves or whether we want to enter into, like I said, what's called performance contracting. So we're looking at both of those. So we haven't spent one penny out of that money from the warrant article yet. We're basically just assessing what's the path that we want to go down. We kind of have to choose a path that we want to go down. I mean, we could invest more time saying, all right, let's go performance contracting, get to a point and then back out. But right now, we're still in that assessment point before we choose which path makes the most sense. And again, obviously, we would have to involve, the full committee, the superintendent and so forth before we really make that decision.
So is that, is that the kind of thing that you might be able to give us some proposals or, choices or your recommended plan in January, in February? What's a realistic timeframe for that to come back for more discussion, to answer Mrs. Monaco's question about what is our plan going to be for the high school?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to give you a full proposal. What I'll be able to give you is an estimate.
Yeah.
So when the companies come in and do the assessment, let's say for the performance contracting, again, they'll do the assessment. But in order to give the full proposal, we'll have to commit to them in the form of an RFP. So an RFP would mean a request for proposal, or we could do a request for qualifications. And then by selecting them as a vendor and committing to them, we would still have to pay for the assessment. And then once we have that assessment in-house, we would know. So whether we choose to pick another vendor and go with our own in-house purchasing of the equipment or going with performance contracting, we're still gonna have to outlay some money.
Yeah, my question is not when can you bring us the proposal? It's when can you bring us some ideas of what plans you see as viable plans that you would be pursuing and then we would be making a decision on that. So I wasn't looking for a final project. Do you have a sense on that?
So again, I apologize because I misunderstood that question. I have two rough estimates now that I could share with you, either in the next meeting if you wanted to, because I do believe that I will have another rough estimate relatively soon. And that'll be comparing two performance-based contracting vendors, and then one vendor that we would be required to do an RFQ on.
So can we, if you and Dr. Conti can work out
Yeah.
sometime in January, whatever's realistic, to bring us some ideas of where you're at with that?
Sure.
Does that sound good?
But-
And Mrs. Monaco? Yeah.
I have a certain level of discomfort with this. I feel as though When we did projects in the past, it was prior administration, in Bobby's position. And I'm sort of rethinking how we did these things back then. And it just seems to me, you have a project as big as what we've got going on at the high school, which is different things. I mean, we've got science labs, we've got heating and cooling system, we've got all kinds of things that need to be done. And it feels to me that we should have someone leading the charge, coming in and isolating out the different parts and saying, do this first, and this is why, and this is how you evaluate all these. It seems like we're like a couple of steps ahead of maybe where we should be. And maybe I'm wrong.
No, again, I think I haven't been as clear as I would have liked. So I think in prior projects, because I was here as well, we had a standing RFP, we had
An architect.
KBA under that contract, and we would utilize them. What I'm suggesting is we do the exact same thing. We need to write it in RFP, so we have services of an architect available to us. We just don't have that now, so that
Okay.
would be,
But we need it before we decide which way to go with heating and cooling. We need someone to tell us, yeah, go out and get the heating and cooling done. Or no, don't, do this first.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but the work we've been doing with the heating and cooling has been precautionary because we're not sure that the heating and cooling, we don't know if the heating and cooling system is going to last. So,
I know.
so that work we sort of have been doing ongoing because it may fail, and that would be more of an emergency. But I am agreeing with you, we need to bring an architect and designer on board under an RFP to help us answer some questions, big picture questions in terms of the order that we're going in. And that was the role, again, that KBA has played in the past.
Right, and then they're not around anymore. But,
Correct.
so I guess, I understand what you're saying, and it maybe it's because I don't have anywhere near as many details as you do. But I wonder if we might do something and then find out it was the wrong thing in the big picture.
Again, our plan is not to do anything. Our plan was to be ready to do something, just in case the system fails. Our next step, and I think maybe Bob didn't stress it enough, is he's working with the town to get an RFP out so that we
For
can
an
get a designer in. So what may happen also in the coming months is you may have 2 or 3 presentations from people, or we have to do lowest bidder. I'm not sure how the procurement works. So we would have to bid for services, you can see it, and then we would bring someone on board who we can ask these questions to.
Okay, yeah, in the past, we had different proposals and we chose which one we would go with, and then that company would lead us through all these decisions.
So, yes, Mr. Gannon. I mean, is this something we don't have to wait for May town meeting for because it's part of this, the warrant we had last summer? So you're in the process of doing it with the town? Can you explain that part?
So again, 2 different things that we're talking about right now. So the prior warrant article was literally just to fund research on HVAC system at the high school. That's it. If we're now talking about designer and/or architecture, which we are, that's something that what we could do is called RFQ, request for qualifications. We could put something out where we're saying, okay, we're looking for somebody with this qualification, this qualification, this qualification. People submit back to us. We could do a request for a proposal, but we don't really have a proposal right now to ask for. So what we would then do is bring in designers that meet the qualifications, people that have designed schools, designed HVAC systems, that have experience as architects and whatnot. Once we bring them on, there are fees associated with that. So it really depends after we have them in-house on contract with us, how much we use them and how much we're gonna ask them to do. So if we ask them to design a whole entire elementary school, they may turn around and say, here's the price X. We would then have to fund that. If we turn around and said, okay, well, here's our plans that we currently had for the HVAC system at the high school, can you update them for us? It may cost us X, and we could use the funding that we already have from the current warrant article. So we really would just need to see what services we ask of them, and then where the funding source would come from at that point.
Good luck.
So, did you have anything else you want to ask about the high school
The only-
project?
Yeah, the only question I had is, this performance-based contracts that you've been discussing, are there a lot of companies out there that do this? I mean, are we gonna be looking at one or two people, or is it, because, I mean, HVAC, there's a million of them. So you might get a really competitive bid if we do it the old-fashioned way.
Exactly.
But this other way, it sounds interesting. It sounds like we could finance it a little bit differently than we would just a normal project. But it might be more expensive if there's only two or three companies that do it.
So I will say that a lot of the major players, as far as manufacturers go for the equipment, HVAC equipment, do offer this. It's not really the local companies that would offer the performance-based contracting. So by doing something like that, you probably do potentially end up spending a little bit more because you're going direct from the manufacturer. So but it really is something that you have to kind of factor in. So at that point, you're then picking a particular brand, and then you're really stuck with that brand. You're stuck with that brand's service as well too, and their controls. Now, if we go a different way, we're still stuck with, and again, that's a positive term, not a negative term. It's just that, like I said, once you go performance-based contracting, the service, the product, the installation, everything is handled in-house by one particular company, usually the manufacturer.
Okay.
So,
But again,
Dr.
I just want to
Conti?
stress,
Yeah.
the work that we've done so far has been precautionary, because we're afraid if the system fails, we're going to have to move quickly. So that's the,
Yeah, Rick, you've shown us the boilers down there, so we know
so
what you're talking
that's the
about.
precaution. Again, I think our next steps is to bring on an architect and designer like KBA in the past, and that they can come and help us prioritize sort of the projects and figure out what to do.
So I'd like to suggest that maybe we continue this discussion at either the first or the second meeting in January, where you'll have a little more information. Are there any other
One
things we
more
want to
question.
ask them to be looking at to bring to us in January? Yeah, go ahead.
I know there's some concern about going over a certain amount of the value of the building at the high school and building codes coming into play and et cetera. I wonder too, if whoever we get ultimately to help us through this project would be a good guide through that maze of how to do this building. I mean, there are some building codes that are vitally important that we need to incorporate, I'm sure, but there's probably a pathway of how to get where we're going without the state aid, since we've been rejected 8 times.
Yes. I think
Yes.
there's a I think a very clear formula that if it's over a certain percentage of the assessed value, I'm not even sure there's been an assessment of this building in
10 years.
in 10 years, so we might even have to do a new assessment. But I'm assuming the designers are experts in that area, and they would come to you and say what the new codes require, from the slope of the hallways for accessibility to.
These are huge changes,
Yes, they are. So, and I think that's.
expensive changes.
So that's, I think, a lot of the cost, so. And the purpose of working with town is, I think town has some design needs as well, and we don't have to do two requests for qualifications. We can just write one and work underneath the same one. So we're trying to work together to do that.
Okay, so we'll come back to that discussion, and if you could put that on the agenda for January when you're ready to do it.
Sure.
And we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the elementary space needs, which we've been talking about every meeting for several months. I did want to comment. I really appreciate all the people who came out last month to talk and share their ideas about elementary schools going forward. I also want to thank the almost 600 people who participated in the survey online. I did read all of them. I did want to make a couple of comments because there was, what I felt reading number of the comments was that we talk about it and we know a lot about it, and it's not necessarily what everyone else knows. And there was some background information I thought might have been missing. And some of the things were pretty simple, like there is not room for a fifth grade at Marshall Simon. So that's why we're not considering that option. Likewise, there isn't room for an eighth grade in this building unless we found another place for the Early Childhood Center and the central office and BCAT and all those other places. So we have not been looking into those options. So that was one area. There was also even, one of the choices is the four-site, for elementary school option, and even that was somewhat confusing. So, Dr. Conti, maybe you could talk a little about what that means, because some people were like, well, why can't you just fix this, and why can't you, there's certain, the quality, not quality, but this condition of Fox Hill and Pine Glen are concerned. So maybe if you could address that issue a little bit, please.
Yeah, so I think the buildings were designed and opened in the late 60s, and I think they've been well-maintained, and they serve their purpose, or they have served their purpose. I just don't think it makes sense to put a whole lot of more renovation dollars into either of those buildings. Now, we may have to, but as Mr. Nelson said, I think what this committee has agreed to is the next statement of interest that we submit to the School Building Authority of Massachusetts should be an elementary school. I think we would have to decide which one, but again, from my perspective in writing these things, Fox Hill would make a better application because we have modulars in use, and I think that is part of the enrollment pressure, evidence of enrollment pressure that the MSBA looks for. And again, no matter how many options the committee wants to look at in terms of 4 sites, 3 sites combining, we can only pick one school to apply for at a time with the state. So we just have to pick one to get approved into the design phase, and that's when all those questions will be answered. So by April, Bob, the team are going to work on a statement of interest. You'll have to sign everything. We'll have to go before other boards for an elementary school. And again, probably to replace Fox Hill. I just think that's the best scenario that we have. And then we would find out a year from now whether we were approved for design phase, not approved to build, not approved for anything else. Then a 6 or 7 year clock starts at that point that we have to go through design and everything else, and where we'd have to answer some questions about that. The questions that we'd have to answer are some of the questions that people responded to when they visited. Do we combine both schools on one site? Can we build on the Pine Glen site? Because even if we replace Fox Hill with a similar size or a slightly larger elementary school with more modern features, and we're still going to have to address building needs at Pine Glen, because Pine Glen was open in the 60s, and we need to either significantly renovate Pine Glen or replace Pine Glen at some point. And we have to look at our overall enrollment. So I think the clear message from the comments that I read and from the folks who visited is, I want to make sure I answer your questions about the 4 sites that would be maintaining 4 elementary schools in our configuration. So it seemed like the parents who visited, now there were, again, some comments that wanted us to look at other options, but it seemed like parents liked their local schools and they wanted to keep their schools. So the Pine Glen families really wanted to keep a Pine Glen, and the Fox Hill families really wanted to keep a Fox Hill. They were worried about combining the two, even if the two were separate on that one building site. There were traffic concerns, as was mentioned. So I think, Madam Chair, I want to make sure I answer your question. So the 4-site option would really be to keep the 4 elementary schools that we have, but we still have significant building needs or building upgrades that are needed, even building replacements that are needed, with 2 of our elementary schools, Pine Glen and Fox Hill, and that we need to approach those one at a time with the state, because that's what the state requires, or we have to do one with the state and we have to do one locally funded. The good thing about doing locally funded schools, and Mr. Nelson, I think you mentioned this in the past, is the timeline we keep is our own at that point, so we don't have to go through a 6 or 7 year process. We could expedite that possibly. But I think that's where this designer also comes into play, because in order for you all to make that decision, or I also think what people are asking for in some of their comments is they want more information, and that more information they want are costs, what's it gonna look like, how big it is, and I think those are questions that we can't really answer now. But in terms of configuration, I think the clear message that we've gotten to date is that people want 4 schools, and they want to keep the 4 schools in the areas in which they are. Unless I'm misreading that or you're hearing something else,
Right.
that's the message that I got from the survey and from the folks who visited.
Okay, so let me also, in terms of numbers on the survey, the 4 choices, given, I mean, some people weren't sure, some people said, I don't feel we have enough information, but given what people gave, 55% of the people said that they did prefer that we keep 4 schools at 4 sites. 18% of the people preferred that we convert Pine Glen to a pre-K kindergarten center with 3 elementary schools that would be grades 1 to 5. 17%, pretty close number, asked that we create a 3-school configuration, with Fox Hill being a large one, a larger school, the 800, and about 9.5% wanted to keep the 4 schools but build 2 at the Fox Hill site. Given all that, the overall comments, I felt that generally people were saying they liked smaller schools, neighborhood schools, which was sort of the 4-school option, that they didn't like having this 800-student school. They also had concerns about district-wide equity issues if we did something like that. I want to repeat what Dr. Conti said. People talked about how much they loved the Pine Glen community and wanted to keep the Fox Hill community. And in terms of the pre-K kindergarten proposal, there were some who didn't want students in that setting because they didn't want them to have additional transitions or to be separated from the older siblings. But there were others who liked that proposal because of the developmental reasons why schools are sometimes recommended to have a pre-K kindergarten programming. So those were concerns. Traffic at Fox Hill, if we combined 2 or had 2 schools there, is a big concern. And another question that people asked a lot is, why don't we renovate, and wouldn't it be cheaper? So again, I want to go back to some of the background information that we are more familiar with. And that is, people asked also, what is the driving need for this discussion? And I think that's something that we kind of assume, but it is enrollment. The enrollments are going up. We have some on-the-ground facts of the enrollment going up in the last couple of years, and we have projections that show it going up about 10% over 10 years. And the enrollment numbers, redistricting, which nobody wanted, would not address the enrollment numbers because we are at capacity in all 4 of our elementary schools. There were also people who were very concerned about classroom size. And the reason for doing these different options is because we want to keep our small classroom sizes. If we wanted to get rid of our small classroom sizes, we could squeeze more kids into every single school and there wouldn't be the same pressures. But we have made a commitment as a committee that we want to keep the small sizes of classrooms, so we need additional classrooms. There isn't a place to put an extra 4th grade at any of our buildings next year, or there might be a tweak on 1 or 2, but there isn't room for all these new students in the buildings we have now. So we have to do something, and I wanted to reassure people who kept asking about the class sizes that the purpose of this is so we don't increase our class sizes. So I want to say that one more time. We are trying not to increase class sizes, and that's why, with the enrollment pressures, we feel we need to build either a new building, which might be a new Fox Hill, because we can't build 2 buildings at the same time, basically. Another area is that people were trying to think of other why don't we build somewhere new? And it's, to my knowledge, I have not heard of any place in Burlington where there's room to build another school. So that doesn't feel like an option. And a couple people mentioned Wildwood, and I don't remember the exact legality, but Wildwood, in making it a park, we accepted state money to make it a park, and it was also to be kept in perpetuity as a park and recreation. So Wildwood site is not available to us as a school site. Is there anyone who has other information on that? Okay, so that's something that other people wouldn't necessarily have known, so I wanted to say that. So what we are talking about is our current 4 sites that we have at Francis Wyman Memorial, Fox Hill, and Pine Glen. As Mrs. Monaco keeps reminding us, we need to find out what can we do at Pine Glen, because there have been issues in the past about what can we build there because of wetlands, because of ledge. Is it even possible to build a new building there? Would we have to renovate? Would we have to expand, whatever? Those are the things we're going to be looking at. That's why we need to get the designer that Dr. Conti's talking about. So I hope that explains what's driving this process of looking for a new elementary building. So one is the enrollment and not wanting to increase class sizes. And the other is that both Fox Hill and Pine Glen were built in the 60s. We've been maintaining them, as Mr. Nelson said earlier. We've maintained as best we can, but they are at a point where it's really not feasible or cost-effective to keep renovating or I don't know what the right word is there. But it's time for us to build a new building. So those are things. I also wanted to clarify, there were a couple people who maybe weren't sure. I'm trying to separate, because we have just had a conversation about renovations at Burlington High School. That's separate from our need to create space at the elementary level. And both of those things are going to be expensive. And so at any point in the next several months, when we talk about the Burlington High School project, and when we talk about the elementary school project, I am very aware that this is very expensive, and the town has been very generous and is working with us to find out, how can we manage this? How can we do this? What do we need to do, looking at the debt schedule and all those other pieces? But in each individual conversation, we may not say that, but it's still there, and we know it. We know these are both expensive projects. So we are doing the research on those, and then good. So I just wanted to be sure that the questions that I heard in some of the comments, I wanted to address, and also for people to have the overall results of the survey that was online, that we got. I had hoped we'd have the pie chart up tonight, but we weren't able to get that.
The pie chart is on the website. So
It's,
people
oh,
can-
okay, so
it's-
the
it
pie
is up.
chart is now on the website under the district tab. If you go into the elementary building section, it should be there now, so that would be available.
yeah.
Okay?
And again, I, just thinking back, and I'll look to Mr. Nelson or Ms. Monaco, we've worked with an architect and had some designs done before getting the funding and making the decision to build in the past. So my understanding was, the middle school, you had the middle school sort of renovation design done well before we approached the state for the funding and got the building project, because I thought we just updated the plans. We didn't reinvest in all new plans when the time came. So, and even with the memorial school, I think there had been 8 years of work done, right? There had been some preliminary work done before we did that. So I think, and bringing on a designer, having him look at things, having him create some plans doesn't mean that's going to happen immediately. But I'm thinking, Mrs. Monaco, if that's sort of more of your thinking what we've done in the past, I think that's what we want to get back to replicating, so we can share more detailed information with you, so you can actually see what it looks like, and we can estimate some of the costs. So I think that's what my thinking is. We just don't have that person on board, and the way that we bring that person on board is through request for qualifications or request for proposal.
Right, but,
So,
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Mrs. Monaco.
The engineering piece of it
Yes.
is what really has me,
Yep.
Because if we find out, yeah, you can go ahead and do whatever you want at Pine Glen, then we have that option, but otherwise, we've got to figure out something that will be all at Fox Hill.
Okay.
Go ahead, Steve.
Mr.
Sorry.
Yep.
Nelson.
That's okay, just a couple of comments. I just want to clarify and reemphasize what the chair was saying a few minutes ago, and just point out, and Martha, you came back to it at the end, but you started out by talking about class size, and that the committee's desire to maintain class sizes was one of the main reasons why we need to build new buildings, but there's certainly many, many others, and you did come around to it. I just don't want people to think that we're stuck on a certain class size, and that's why we need to build a new building. These buildings were built in the 60s, I believe. Early and mid-60s, they're over,
Pine Glen
they're
was
over,
even earlier,
Pine
wasn't
Glen might have been the 50s. I mean, they're over 50, 55, 60 years old. The design of the classrooms is outdated. They wouldn't qualify today if you were building a new elementary school. The rooms are too small, they're not properly outfitted, they don't have, and Bob can talk about this, they're not wired the way we'd like to see them wired for computer and technology issues. We got portables at Fox Hill, don't forget. So we've already got pressure at Fox Hill with the portable buildings. And to renovate buildings like the Pine Glen that are that old, sometimes the renovation costs are almost as much as knocking the building down and building a new building. It's just, it can be cost prohibitive. And like Dr. Conti said, I don't really want to put money into the renovation of that building because it might be throwing good money after bad when you look at it. We have maintained the buildings reasonably well over the years, but it's time to replace them. They're just old, and they're showing their wear and tear. The other thing that I'd like to reiterate is that I appreciated all the input from the parents at our last meeting. I thought it was very helpful. In an ideal world, I would like to keep 4 elementary schools. We got a great setup right now with the 4 elementary schools in different neighborhoods. They're smaller size schools. Parents love them. The only way I think we're going to be able to maintain a 4 elementary school model is if the Burlington community, and Eric was touching on this, is willing to self-fund one of the buildings. Because I can tell you, being on this committee as long as I have, the state is not going to give Burlington money for an elementary school and then 5 years or 10 years later give Burlington money for another one. We got 354, I think, cities and towns fighting for the money. We're never going to get money for 2 elementary schools. I mean, it's not going to happen. So the parents are going to have to help, drive that narrative and make sure that, town meeting is aware of the desire to have 4 schools, and the parents are going to have to help this committee, if that's the road that we go down, to make sure we get the funding for it. So we're going to have a private funded high school, a hopefully publicly funded elementary school at Fox Hill, and then maybe another privately funded school at the Pine Glen. That's the ideal model. I mean, it's not ideal in terms of having to privately fund it, but that's the ideal model going forward, is having that. So we'll have to find out what the town is willing to do. They might say, go for a larger school at Fox Hill so we can get the state to pay for 50 or 55% of it. So we'll see. It's going to be a long journey, but I did want to thank the parents as well for their input. Very helpful. Thank you.
Mrs., did you have something you want to add right now? Okay, Mrs. Monaco?
One final thing that just came to my mind is, I know the city of Woburn and the city of Beverly did a rotation of replacing all of their elementary schools. Now, I don't know why they could get it and we couldn't, so I'm wondering if we can find anything out about that. Is there some plan we don't know about? Has it changed? If other communities have been able to do one and then another, why can't we do it? Okay.
So I would like to, there were 2 comments that I didn't see on my list here that I wanted to make sure I included. And another is that people several people commented that they didn't want to be redistricted, which is very understandable. Unfortunately, because of increasing enrollments, no matter which option we choose, whether we go with any of these different options, there is very likely going to be redistricting. And I don't know that there's any part of town that's been more redistricted than another in the past, but it would be dependent on what our, we would have to redistrict because there'd be space in different parts of town. And we have some computer models that I think you used on the last time, and so it's unfortunate, and it's of course upsetting, although people need to remember, this is not going to happen in the next 3 years. So even if it's privately funded, I mean, if this is an MSBA project, we're talking 7 or 8 years down the road. So if your kids are in
Yes.
elementary now, it's not real likely. but-
So, Madam Chair, just let me just clarify some
Okay.
things, because we look at redistricting every year. So it's
Okay.
related to new buildings, but not necessarily directly connected to new buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Redistricting, a lot of times, is more dependent on where we see students in town, where the population sort of expands and contracts. And if there's new building, like on Third Ave or Second Ave or in Corporate Drive, and we see more students coming from there, then we might have to place those students in. So redistricting is sort of an
Okay.
annual dilemma. Reconfiguration is something that doesn't take place annually. That's whether we are a pre-K school, 1 to 5, 6 to 9, sort of the reconfiguration takes place sort of generationally, or at least it should. And then that would impact new buildings as well. But redistricting is something that we try to balance out. Again, we have typically 16 elementary classrooms at a grade, distributed all throughout town, and we try to balance as best we can. So we also have lots of parents who choose to send their kids to schools that aren't necessarily in the zone in which they live. And to date, we've been able to honor all of those requests as long as the parents provide transportation. So one of the mechanisms would be, as we get more crowded and we need to balance, the change may be we have to start denying some of those requests, which is going to be a real change in practice because we've accepted them for such a long period of time. So again, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Redistricting is,
Okay.
again, connected to new buildings, but we do look at that every year, and it is, I know, something that is challenging, and no one likes to do it, and we try to minimize it, but it may be something that we need to do.
Okay. Thank you. And the last comment, there was a comment that said thank you, and I'm glad that people did participate in the survey, and it said, I hope you actually read this. So I want whoever wrote that to know that I did read all of the responses, and I'm really glad that people put their input into it. So I'd like to move on to our next agenda item, and that would be our communications, and starting with our financials, monthly financials. And I might suggest, we have A and E, and maybe we want to do those in order, but I guess when we get to the end of A, we can see if that's a good match.
So again, Madam Chair, my suggestion is, it seems like all under communication are financials, so
Yes.
it's really going to be Nicole's part of the meeting. So we have a lot of ground to cover,
Yeah.
so I'll just turn it over to
Oh, I-
Nicole. So
I meant A and C, but anyway, go ahead. All right. Thank you. So,
Thanks. So starting with the monthly financials, again, the same format that you see each month. From last month, between the three sections, the revolving, the operating, and accommodated, really not much difference. I think the only thing that I felt maybe worth noting was that the school lunch balance is a little, the deficit is a little higher than it was the prior month. And I just wanted to point out that this is due to recently, there was a couple of contractual stipends that were paid out, which hit in this month. I think one was clothing allowance and their serve safe stipends. So that's why you see the increase there.
okay.
But other than that, if anyone has any questions.
So I would like to just comment on the before-school, after-school programming, which we talked about last year. There is still a large balance there, but we did get some information about what upcoming costs there are. Do you want to comment on that, or do you want me to pick out some of the highlights that I had from that. Donna Sullivan, who's the director, had given us some information on that. Do you want to summarize that, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can touch on a
Okay.
few things that Donna had pointed out. She had mentioned that some of the payments come in ahead of time, so for programming that starts later, so sometimes it's sort of inflated balance there due to the timing of payments, which is something that I think we see commonly in revolving accounts, which is why they're revolving accounts. Another was, there was some transportation bills for field trips that haven't come through yet. Some other additional plans that they had, such as additional walkie-talkies for the program. Some others were, I think, some security locking systems for the space that the after-school program uses. So all of these expenses are sort of not yet accounted for on the report that you see, but are sort of things that are either happening in the background or in progress, that just haven't hit that account yet.
Okay. And I also thought one of the comments, she said they collect first and last month's tuition at the beginning of the year, so that would be a big chunk as well. Mr. Nelson?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Donna Sullivan for
Yes.
responding to my questions at the last meeting about that account. I just think we should take a look at it at the end of the year and see if we're still significantly over what we need for a reserve, and maybe we talk about tuition reductions.
All right. So, are there any other comments on the revolving funds from the committee and from Ways and Means? No. Okay. And then any comments on the rest? Were you gonna,
There
are we in
wasn't-
good shape?
There wasn't
Nicole?
much fluctuation from last month, so,
Right. So we're in good shape?
yes.
Any comments on the rest of the financials? Yes, Mrs. Harrigan.
I just had a question. Last month, our remaining budget was 922,697 under operating. I'm looking at page 2 from last month. And this month, we're at 1,556. And I'm just curious how we have a higher remaining budget. So did you, something get reclassed maybe or something?
Which line item are you looking at?
I'm looking at the bottom of.
The bottom line.
Page 2, okay,
Comparing one month to another.
okay.
October to November. I'm thinking something might have gotten moved out of operating in somewhere else possibly. And I might be with line 24 possibly, because there seems to be a difference there. I don't know if anything rings a bell.
I can look into it and get back to you. I don't have last month's in front of me right now.
Okay.
And Ms. Harrigan, there are some things as we get more information, just from last year, and I'm not sure this is the cause, but we can ask is, teachers have the sick day bonus, and Nicole budgets that at 100%, and as teachers use their sick time, that actually adds money back into the operating budget, so the liability becomes less. So if you remember from last year, that was one of the things that we tracked. Again, I'm not sure that's the cause of this, but there are some things that add money back into that bottom line, so.
All right. Any further questions about the monthly financials? Okay. So if you wouldn't mind continuing, and
Up next is the Rosellian Clark.
okay,
So, as you know, in 2015, the state audit guidelines for student activities changed, which required an outside audit firm perform an audit of our student activities. The first one that we completed was for the period ending June 30th of 2017. That report detailed some major cleanup. A lot of them were, a lot of checking accounts that weren't under the town's tax ID, et cetera, just a lot of cleanup, policies that needed to be written and implemented, procedures, employee training, all of which we've done. So this committee agreed that we would have Roselli and Clark come back out to sort of, just check out, make sure things are moving in the right direction. So in your packets, you have a memo from Roselli and Clark, which sort of outlines the progress.
I didn't get
She
one.
might have sent it separately.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was
that's an
emailed
old one, okay, I
separately.
think I've
Oh,
seen that.
maybe I sent it separately, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So basically, I think that this new memo sort of shows that all of the tremendous effort that's been put forth by our school secretaries and the business office staff in carrying out the committee's newly adopted policies. And I think that this memo reflects that. While there are still some improvements that do need to be made, I think that this report didn't contain any major surprises. And the primary focus of the last report was on the elementary schools and just sort of cleaning up those accounts and getting them all into one account per school. So this memo sort of drilled down more a little bit on the high school and cleaning things up there. Since this memo, since Roselli and Clark came out in September, there's been a lot of things that have already been addressed. From this report, just gonna name off a couple of things. One, that we've had bolt-down safes installed at each of the elementary schools. So right now, well, before that, we had locked cash bags. But sometimes, if there's multiple things going on at a school, the cash bag might not come back the same day, so then they have cash on hand that, they don't know what to do with. So we've installed the safes to make sure that, there's no cash lying around, everything's secured. I have increased the volume of checks at the schools to make sure that they're not running out of checks. There's no issues with field trips, everything will run smoothly. The high school has renamed some accounts that the auditor had suggested. The high school prior class accounts have been closed out. Revenue for the high school parking has been turned over to the general fund, which is required by Mass General Law. The student procedures have been updated for travel to comply with DESI regulations. There was just some minor tweaking with the forms. So a lot of progress has been made since they've come out in September.
So, first of all, I do appreciate, as you mentioned, the tremendous amount of change and work that went into this at the building level and in the business office. And I also want to thank you, because it was your vision and your procedures and your following through that made this all happen. So I want to thank you for that. And I'm glad we had this additional audit done. And as you said, it was sort of a drilling down further. And I see that we're still fixing the things that need to be fixed and changing the things that need to be changed. And I'm very pleased to hear all of what you've accomplished, as well as all the people that have done the detailed changes. So thank you for that.
Martha,
Yes, Mrs. Monaco.
I just have a question for Eric about, when I read that report and I noticed that it said we leased parking spaces to the students, and I thought, I don't know, it seems to me if you lease a space, you have an assigned space, and it's yours and nobody else can use it. And I don't think that's what we do. And I don't know the law that says, how broad it is about that money. But two things came to my mind. One is, it's a fee. It's really not a lease. And I wonder if we considered it a fee, does it still have to go to the general fund? And then my second point is that the whole reason we did it was just to have the kids have a little extra cash in their student activity accounts. So if we have to turn that money over to the general fund, I don't see why we're charging the kids at all. So that's for another agenda, but I would like to address that in the future, because I don't think we should be charging the kids and then turning it to the general fund. That's like having an athletic fee or a bus fee or.
I agree, and I think we can certainly talk more about it. I think the fee, what were they charging? Was it $10? Is that right?
I'm not sure what it was.
So I
I know
think,
it's small.
but
Yeah.
So,
I think it was almost a way of controlling how many cars get brought in. There are high schools that charge $100 for, so we cannot charge anything, but we're still gonna have to create some way of
You need a sticker, but you don't have to pay for it.
figuring out who can park and who can't. But, and maybe we need to figure out a way then to jumpstart some of the class where this money was going as well. So I just think we can sort of talk about both things.
I'm sure that these kids would rather buy 2 sandwiches at Subway than pay for that,
Yeah, again, 100%, it wasn't about the revenue, so
Right.
it was never about
Okay.
the revenue, so I
So
think
we
that
will
we.
address that.
Okay.
Okay. Including the question about if it's a fee or a lease or whatever, could you find out the answer to that as well? Okay, great, thank you. And are there any other comments from the school committee about this Roselli and Clark report? Yes, Mrs. Russo.
Thank you. First, I want to echo thank you to everyone's secretaries. It's been a lot of work, a lot of hours for you and the business office and everybody else involved setting the way in which the process is up, and then following through with them. We can set them up, but then it's important that they get followed. So thank you for making sure that's happening, it's being done. It's, when we first saw the first report, it was a shock and very difficult, but I am extremely pleased it's what we've done with it. To me, that's very important. And I want, again, thank everyone administrative, right down to everybody in the schools who are doing it and following that. I did have one question. It says, for the different schools, they're unsure if activities were approved by the school committee. Does that mean we're supposed to be approving all field trips? What do they mean by activities, I guess?
So basically, just the establishment of each club or student group.
Okay.
So it's actually on the agenda tonight for you
Okay,
guys
so
to
that
vote them.
is, so it's what we were looking at and went further down. So it's not just random field trips or things of that nature.
Right, so it would
Yep.
just be
Okay.
grade 1 field trips at the elementary school, grade 2 field trips, but not necessarily each field trip that
Okay.
flows through that
Okay.
sub-account.
Great. I was hoping it wasn't coming into the agenda. Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee?
Any comments from the Ways and Means about the Roselli and Clark report?
Very happy with,
Actually, is your microphone on? Can we make sure? Thank you. No button, so it's on? Okay, thank you.
And you can
very happy with the results. I'm glad to see that we've got a lot of the things cleaned up already. Just chipping away at this list, and it should be cleaned up really quickly. Thank you.
Good. Dr. Conti, did you want to add something? Okay. All right, yes. So we all set with the Roselli and Clark report. Okay, Mrs. Kasha, would you continue, please?
Sure. Next is the Choice and International account.
Nicole, can I maybe take a stab at this too, so you can help
Sure.
me? Because Mrs. Monaco asked the question, so I did get it on the agenda, so I do half listen once in a while. So,
I know that.
I know, if you, Mrs. Monaco asked for more detail on the school choice in the international studies line, so it says activity account, and I just want to make sure on the agenda, but Nicole, that's a revolving account, is it?
Yes.
So again, that's my fault, so if you go back to your monthly financials, page 1, and if you go to line 373, that's school choice, so you can see the balance of the school choice at 373. And then if you go to the account 39771, the bottom line account, international studies, And then the balance is all the way to the right, the $85,876. So does everyone see where we're at? So those are the two accounts. And again, Nicole did all this work, so if you then, in your agenda, if you, the expenses that were charged to those accounts are sort of both listed. We don't budget operations out of either of those accounts because those accounts aren't definitive every year. We could have no students show up for choice. We could have no students come in for international. So again, I just want to make sure we don't want to cliff build, so we don't want to add teachers or positions from those accounts. What do we use those accounts for? The Department of Revenue and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education allow a lot of flexibility in terms of those accounts. And you can see by some of the expenses that are listed, there's a lot of things that we use. So under the school choice, Mrs. Monaco on, it's right after the monthly financials.
I have it.
You have it? So you can see that we do anything from some broken technology at Memorial that we need sort of fixed right away to heartworm for Scooter. So
Way to go.
again, broken pumps for the aquaponics lab, something that maybe we weren't planning on in the operating budget that we have to fix, quickly. It just gives us an account to make sure that we are doing things that are sort of educational and allows us really to solve some problems. So you can see what we bought in the school choice account, and then followed by that on the international international expenses, bless you. Again, our virtual high school affiliation, so there's some coursework that's paid out of there. We support the Tenacity Challenge, which with our international student funds, and then we also have some projector that broke that we just tried to get fixed quickly. So who has access to those accounts? We do set aside a block of money for high school principal because he's housing the international students, and we no longer give him a principal's capital account in the operating budget. So he gets a certain dollar amount that's set aside for high school needs to fix some high school things. And then, but access to all of these accounts goes through Nicole. So if Nicole thinks there's something that's way out of bounds or not appropriate for the account, there is a gatekeeper on those expenditures. And again, Nicole and I will have those conversations. So it's not, again, it's not freewheeling. But if you'd like more detail on those accounts, again, we can provide you more detail fairly regularly. But I don't necessarily think we may not do anything next month. I'm not sure monthly makes sense, but if you want to know if there's a significant something that comes out of there, we can do that. It also helps us with year end. So, Sue, if we get into trouble at year end, it may be something that we can, that helps us because we can carry the revolving more than 1 year. So again, that was the detail. We answered your question. Excellent. So, how'd I do? Okay?
Great.
All right.
Is there
Excellent.
anything you want to add to that? Okay. Do you have any further questions on that?
No.
Okay. Any questions in general on this topic from anyone? Okay. I also, going back to the Roselli and Clark account, Mrs. Gilbert, is that the kind of thing you would add to the packet, since it didn't come in with our packet in terms of the on file, that would be included? Yeah, okay, you already took care of it, okay. So next, it's still on, you're still on.
Next.
Budget transfer expenses to
Okay,
salaries.
yes.
Mhm.
So we recently encountered a need for some additional nursing services. And fortunately, our nursing supervisor obtained a grant this year to cover something that she had budgeted in the expense side of operating. So because she relieved that pressure on her expenses, we're going to ask the committee to transfer $22,000 to salaries to support those additional services that are
So
needed.
moved.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion on that transfer from expenses to salary? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The chair votes aye, so it's 4-0-0. Did I get it right this time? Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Again, Madam Chair, just
Yep.
while we're on that topic, and I haven't even had a chance to discuss this with everyone yet, I just want to plant the seed right now. Maybe coming back in January, there may be need for actually another full-time nurse, and I'm not exactly sure how we would cover it. And so we may need to have an executive session just so I can justify the need. And it may be something that I think would be potentially appropriate for half a year for the committee, may want to approach Ways and Means about an RFT. I don't know that yet. I just wanted to plant the seed. I might have more information, and it just might be something that we need to think about in January when I have more information, and I'll explain that to everyone as I get all the details in January.
Okay, thank you. All right, so if we can continue now to the school student groups and clubs approval.
Sure, so, as Mrs. Russo mentioned earlier, the question about the approval of the student groups, this is what you have before you. It's a listing of each of the groups that have been operating at all of the schools. So we have a list for the high school, all of their student groups, clubs, the middle school, same, and then each elementary, well, all elementaries, but each school has the same accounts, groups and clubs. So basically, the committee just needs to vote to establish these, and going forward, if there's additional student groups or clubs that are established, say at the high school, middle school, elementary level, they would come before the committee to be approved and then added to student activities.
I move that we approve the high school activities and clubs as presented to us in this agenda.
Second?
Okay, and
Question?
conversation, yeah. Mrs. Russo? Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Mhm.
So with the high school groups, a lot of these, we have approved them with stipends when they've come before us as new.
Right.
So this is something separate from that type of approval? When we approve the stipends to establish an activity, is that one and the same, or are we going to be looking at two different?
So I think going forward, we could sort of make those votes the same.
Okay.
But where there wasn't sort of one meeting where all of these were approved, or there was no sort of tracking of which ones had been approved by the committee or not, we just sort of lumped them all together
Okay.
for now to make sure every group was covered.
Okay, thank you.
Question?
Okay, yes, Mr. Nelson?
I'm a little confused. Are we approving just a club, or are we approving revolving accounts for the clubs?
No, these are just student activity.
Just student activities?
So these are just the clubs and the groups that operate under the high school student activities, the middle school student activities. They're not separate accounts, they're not revolving accounts, it's just the activity that flows through their student activity accounts.
Okay.
So these are
'Cause you,
funds then that are part of the student activities account at the high school. And these are the clubs that are authorized if we pass this.
Yes.
okay. Yeah, when I looked, for example, at the Marshall Simons Middle School, it said group/club, and then it said principal account. And it talked about photography money. That's just what we're gonna call the group?
Yeah, that's sort of like the standard of what those accounts are called when it's not necessarily.
Then it says grade 6, field trips and class-based activities. Is there gonna be a sub-account for grade 6 field trips that comes under that principals account that we were supposed to set up during the last audit?
So basically how the student activities work is each school has their own account. And then under that account, there's like these subgroups that, the way that we track them, to say, you know, if the photography club has $20, we make sure that they don't spend more than their $20 that they have. So this is sort of just a way of subcategorizing that,
Okay. So
if that makes.
this is really for
More sense.
accounting purposes, so that we can track, we've got one main principal account, and then we've got all these sub-accounts for these various activities that we're approving tonight. Is that a fair way of saying it?
No, the principal account's also just a separate one, so that's it would be like the picture money, the photography money that comes in, and then it would be up to the principal's discretion to use it for students. So say if there's a financial hardship of a student going on a field trip, they'd be able to use the funds in that account to help a student that maybe otherwise would not be able to attend the field trip.
Any
I
other
think I looked at it.
questions? I want to try another shot at this. So from my understanding, so we're authorizing these clubs or these categories to be users of the student activity account in each building? Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah.
Thought
Okay.
included in,
And, pardon?
included in.
Okay. And also in terms of, when we vote on stipends, because that's a salary issue, and those are connected to some of these activities, but they're a separate issue that we're authorizing these clubs, and now going forward, we wouldn't authorize them every year, because we are now if we vote tonight, we would be setting them up in response to all of these changes we've been making over the last couple of years. But then we wouldn't have to in the future unless we were going to close one of these clubs or authorize a new one. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. Whereas if we have new stipends coming on, we would have to authorize new stipends separately as a teacher's stipend. Okay. Any further questions on this? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, abstain? The chair votes aye, 400. Thank
I move
you.
we accept the, what's the word, wait a minute. We approve the establishment of student activity groups, clubs at the middle school as presented in
Second.
this agenda.
Second.
Okay, any further conversation? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye. It's
So-
400.
On this next one, it's all elementary, it just covers all 4 schools?
Just instead of listing a separate page for each school, I just said.
They're all the same?
Yes.
Okay, so I move that we accept, that we approve the establishment of student activity groups, clubs for the 4 elementary schools as presented in tonight's agenda.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye. That's 400. I want to also congratulate, all of these amazing clubs and activities that we have in our schools is a real testament to the district, but also to the teachers who provide the hours to help kids with all of these different things. And then I know that some of these are for field trips and such, but we have 40, I counted 40 clubs at the high school, and I'm just really delighted that we have all those kind of options for students. Okay, so the next item is the budget guideline for fiscal '21. Dr. Conti?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we've had a subcommittee meeting with the Selectmen Subcommittee from the school committee, with the selectmen, and with the chair and vice chair of Ways and Means. We had 2 meetings several weeks ago where we went over the general financial condition of the town, some 5-year projections, and then we discussed our sort of budget needs moving forward, and we're talking about now fiscal '21, believe it or not. So, so that would be the budget year that we're currently in. I think there was some negotiating back and forth. I don't think anyone left the meeting fully satisfied, and some may define that as a sort of a positive outcome or a good compromise. Last night at Ways and Means, I think the town's financial picture was presented to the full Ways and Means Committee that was there. I think the town administrator was looking to recommend sort of a 3% growth in operating budgets moving forward. We felt that was insufficient for the schools, given that we have growing student needs and open contracts. And so I think the compromise that we ended up, or Ways and Means ended up agreeing to, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, was a 3.5% increase blended. So that would be, the schools would really be sort of starting the budget process and building the budget process around a quarter point, so around 3.75 over our fiscal '20 budget, and that would be sort of the starting point for us. And that was what Ways and Means voted on and approved. This committee has typically had the same discussion and voted and approved. We would have been ahead of the Ways and Means Committee to share that information with them, but because of the storm, we're after. But Ways and Means did vote unanimously to approve the 3.5% blended guideline for fiscal '21.
So, do people have comments on that before we take a vote? Yeah. You want to start, Mrs.
Yeah.
Monaco?
Yeah. Well, I have sort of a different opinion on the guidelines. So I understand that the town administrator and the town accountant are doing their job, and they're doing it very well. They are, as usual, they are conservatively coming up with guidelines that they feel are fairly safe, and they project into the future in a very conservative manner, which I would do as well if I were in their shoes. And I appreciate all their hard work and their support in areas like the accommodated account and the building projects. But I don't feel that the guideline is quite enough for a comfort level after the past few years that we've been through some difficult times. And we're not really far apart. I think we're only about 0.25 percentage point apart. I would have felt more comfortable with a blended guideline that gave schools 4, and they were more comfortable with a blended guideline that gave schools 3.75. So I wanted to state my reasons why I don't feel as though we're in a doomsday scenario. I think the economy's fairly good. And I think that when the economy is fairly good is the right time to do some of the things that need to be done. And some of the things, just briefly, that come to mind, Eric mentioned nurses. I spoke last week at some length with our nurse supervisor, and we have a serious need for nurses. There are children with life-threatening illnesses in our schools now, and they have to be staffed. It's just an absolute necessity. They have to be staffed. We have some positions that were eliminated a couple of years ago, the 2 assistant principals that I think are badly needed to be reinstated. Because when you have 480 kids, or anywhere from 4 to 5 to 600 kids in a school, having one administrator just isn't enough, in addition to the day-to-day work. They also have to evaluate all the teachers, and the evaluation process, as Martha pointed out last night at the Ways and Means meeting, evaluation process is very complex. It's very difficult. It's a lot of work. So my last point is that we talk about not going backwards, not cutting programs, keeping up our standards, and I think with schools, we're always going forward. We're not satisfied with the status quo. We're always trying to move ahead. So I am just simply uncomfortable with the guideline. I understand they're doing their job, they're doing it well, but I feel as though in order to do my job, I have to speak up for the schools. Oh, and I did forget this major point, which is that every single one of our contracts is being negotiated this year for new 3-year contracts. So I am not quite comfortable with the guideline.
Yes, Mr. Nelson.
Just a couple of brief comments. I really haven't had a chance to digest this fully, but I agree with what Mrs. Monaco has said. It looks to me like it's the exact same guideline as last year. So,
It
I mean,
is.
I want to thank the Ways and Means Committee for recommending a guideline that was higher than what the town was looking for. And as Mrs. Monaco said, the town is very conservative, and they've always been conservative. And very rarely do we find ourselves, when it comes time to set the tax rate, in a really bad position. The town has done very well with free cash over the years. I'm assuming, did they talk about free cash
Yes.
last night? Is it gonna be $1 million each? Is that what they're doing?
They didn't get into that, but they gave the free cash number 13 some.
Yeah,
Okay,
13 million and something.
13 million in free cash. But are we, on warrant articles, are we gonna each do $1 million?
They didn't talk about.
No, okay. I mean, it's not the end of the world at 3.75%, but as Chris has indicated, we're down, I think, 2 assistant principals. We lost the assistant principal at the Memorial School. Last year, we asked the Fox Hill principal, what do you need more, an assistant principal or guidance counselor? And they needed the guidance counselor, because guidance counselors do a lot more nowadays than they did when we were going through the system. But I would like to see, as Chris said, another assistant principal at those 2 schools. I don't think, from prior conversations with Dr. Conti, we can do that at 3.75. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can pull off a miracle, but I don't think we can do it. And those are critically important positions, so I'm hoping somehow we can come in maybe a little higher than the 3.75 and figure out a way to get the assistant principals, even if it's only 1 this year and 1 next year. I still think that we need them both. You know, and as Chris had also said, and I'm reiterating a lot here, but at the Memorial School, for example, you have 1 principal who's supposed to go and evaluate every single teacher pretty much in the building. And it's almost impossible to do it as well as I know the principals would like to do it. That was the beauty of having an assistant principal there for, was David there 2 years?
2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 years. And that's how you build a good staff, because the assistant principals are trained in evaluations, and they can go in and they can sit down with the teachers, do their observations, give them real strong recommendations as to how they can become better teachers, and I think it's important. And I just want to voice my concern that at 3.75, I think we're shortchanging the program. I really do. So, thanks.
And Madam Chair, just
Yes,
for a
Dr.
point of clarification, again, at this point, we actually have more students at Fox Hill than we have at Memorial. So Fox Hill has, again, we designed, when we built the new memorial, to leave room at Fox Hill, and that room has been taken. So we refer to Memorial as sort of the second largest school, and it's really Fox Hill and Memorial are comparable, but Fox Hill happens to be larger at this time.
Yes, Mrs. Russo.
Thank you. I feel very similar to Mrs. Monco and Mr. Nelson. Again, have the guideline we have from last year. Last year was tight. We weren't able to get the assistant principals, the nurses in there. I understand the municipal, the town accountant, their philosophy. We are not always going to have times such as these, when we start to fall back. But we are building up those reserves, so the hopes that we can continue with the budget that we have when those times occur. We are looking at free cash. They're being very conservative in terms of using that, which is excellent and will provide for the town when we move forward. You know, it's easy for me to say, and I'll take the hit on it, another 0.25% would do a lot for our budget. And while I'm not the town administrator, I don't see it affecting the free cash and what we can put aside that would then ruin us and send us way back when those times come that we do not have the income into our town that we do have now. And it's cyclical. Those times are coming. You know, you have to prepare for it, and our town does an excellent job doing so. The nurses are a critical piece. We have been building them up, but in my mind, too slowly. The assistant principals, I'm in a much smaller school, and just seeing how much time and effort is taken in that evaluation. And then when you have the principal out, you don't have that consistency that you do with an assistant principal for 400 students, families, teachers, everything that's happening and going on that daily basis. And Murphy's Law, it always happens when that principal's out of the building, you know, for a conference or to attend a district meeting, for whatever needs to happen. I would really feel much more comfortable if we could accomplish it this year with 0.25% versus trying to do this over and over and over again. We have contracts. We are going to do our best for fair, equitable contracts. We're nosing what other contracts are being settled for. So we are going to do our best, but again, every single contract's open and needs to be worked into our budget. The town is very generous with our departments. That 0.25% would just be a very, it would be, again, it would do a lot for my mind, you know, with a little amount, and really bring it all together. So I didn't say it as eloquently as the rest.
Madam Chair, may I just make a point of
Yes, Dr.
clarification, just
Conti.
with some of what's being said? So the three numbers that were really discussed last night were stabilization, free cash, and then excess levy capacity. So the stabilization is obviously for the town's, is the town's rainy day fund. The free cash, the way I think about it, it's certainly an emergency fund. Town meeting, selectmen, Ways and Means can have access to that money if necessary. But we also take our capital, our annual capital needs out of the free cash. So I think free cash does supplement our operating budget on the capital side. So again, typically Ways and Means has dedicated about $2.6 million of that, of which we've received roughly 50% every year. So that does help our annual capital needs. That does come out of free cash and saves our operating budget from having to deal with that. It's the excess in the levy that they were really projecting out over 5 years. And so I think the excess levy capacity now was around $12.5 million. I think roughly, I know I'm doing the rough numbers, and their concerns were if operating budgets increased, weren't managed or increased too much, then that $12.5 million excess or capacity in the levy limit would shrink sort of in 5 years, and then at the conclusion of 5 years, even with some growth projected in, that we wouldn't have any excess capacity in the levy limit. That would make Burlington sort of like many other surrounding communities. And then our budget conversations actually get much simpler, because then we're bumping up against the 2.5 limit. So it was really it was the excess capacity in the levy, Mr. Nelson, that was driving their concern. And again, they didn't pick a number. They didn't say we want to maintain a $12 million excess levy limit, but they also didn't want to be on a spending path that they felt would reduce the levy limit down to where there was none. So I think that was the concern, wasn't in the free cash. I think there was also an acknowledgement, which I did appreciate, that they need to spend more on long-term debt on capital projects. And they did mention the school specifically, they mentioned a police station specifically. So I do think the town is planning, and you all have been part of those conversations, where the town is going to be looking to increase its funding of long-term debt, which would equate to the buildings that we were talking about. And by doing so, you also don't want that increase to impact operating budgets either. So I'm saying, I think there's a complex picture that they're looking at. And again, before I make some final comments, Madam Chair, you haven't spoken to the guidelines, so I wanted to give you a chance, and then I'll sort of
Right.
say my piece at the end.
And I'd also like to give the Ways and Means an opportunity. I don't really have something new to say. I think that people have expressed my similar ideas. And when I hear you discuss sort of the townwide finances, and, you know, I appreciate all of what people said, the way the town administrator and the town accountant are looking at long-term managing the money. Part of the conversation last night at the Ways and Means Committee was, you know, taxpayers who are on fixed incomes. And when I think about that, I think, well, it's sort of abstract. And I say, well, okay, 3.75%, and that's, you know, we won't be going backwards. But then I think about what, as Mrs. Monaco said very nicely, I mean, what's our job? Our job is to provide the best education we can for the students within the capacity of the town of Burlington. We, every year, go through the budget, and we are unable to fund all of the needs that we see. And none of those needs, and I know Dr. Conti said this before, none of them are unreasonable requests from the various buildings and principals and such. And so if we could go, you know, 0.25% higher, I would like to see that. You know, this Ways and Means has brought up in the past areas that we aren't funding satisfactorily. And that's not to say that we aren't getting a generous amount of money from the town, because I do believe that the town is very generous. But so I'm a little on the fence about what I should vote. And so I'd actually like to ask, I know we're going to vote on this tonight, but what are we, I mean, I'd like to see you bring us a budget that has the 2 assistant principals and has the math coaches that would provide equity across the district. And there's a couple other positions that I can't think of right now. And I'm pretty sure that that would put us over the 3.75 guideline. So I don't want to vote for a 3.75 guideline and then ask Dr. Conti to come and put in the 2 assistant principals, which, since before I came on the school committee, has been a really high priority for me. So, and again, each year, there's been reasons why we haven't been able to do it. And is this the year where we should say? So if you would like to respond to that, I see you had.
No, I think what I would say is a guideline is just that. It's a guideline. So I'm not sure there's any magic in the 3.75 versus the extra 1/4 point. So I wouldn't even want you to commit to the extra 1/4 point if that's what you were doing. I'm not sure you have enough information now. So I'm not even sure a vote's needed. We can certainly get Ways and Means opinion. I think you can table it. I think we can start to model a budget. I think we all have good ideas. I've done this long enough, I could probably be pretty close. But if we're going to sort of build a budget around the 3.75 and figure out where that gets us, we're going to be bargaining contracts at the same time. And I think when we get closer on some contracts and you see the impact of what we're asking for, then we can have that, that conversation. So does 3.85 do it for us? Does 3.7 do it? Does 4.2? I don't know. But I'm saying I think we have to start somewhere is sort of what I said. So I think if we start our building of the budget at 3.75, I just think it's way too early to add a 1/4 point or
Okay.
to a guideline. To me is just sort of guardrails, and we're going to start operating within those guardrails. Nicole's gotten her budget sheets out to principals because the clock is ticking, and we just need to see what those needs are.
Okay, Mrs. Monaco, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple of things. I agree with you on the quarter point. I was really referencing that as more of a comfort level for myself. We have always, I believe, have always voted on the guidelines. I think if we were to take a vote right now, we probably would not get all the votes that are needed to accept these guidelines. I did want to point out, Eric, your detail about the 2.5
Right.
ceiling, et cetera. I agree, and like I said at the beginning, the town accountant and the town administrator are doing their job. On the other hand, going all the way back to Pat Mullen, who was far before your time, we have always seen these predictions and these very careful, conservative charts about where we could be, not obviously where we will be, but where we could be if, you know, if all the businesses moved out of Burlington or whatever. I personally feel as though they are doing their job, and they're doing it well, and they're very conservative. I think that the likelihood of us hitting the 2.5 limit in 5 years is about as close to zero as you can get. But I could be wrong. We could all be bankrupt next week. So I just wanted to really emphasize that I too appreciate everything that the town does do to support us financially. We are well-funded. I think it's important that we stay ahead of the game with schools, because it's one of the reasons why our town is growing. There are families coming in, there are houses being built, because people are pretty much happy with the school services and other services around town. It's just that we're in a little bit of a tug of war, because they're doing their job well, and I can't bring myself to say, well, okay, I'll go along with having them do their job well, and I'll give up on what I feel I should be doing. I feel I should be doing more in arguing in this good economy for a little bit more for the schools, and so that's where I plan to stay. Maybe if we don't take a vote, it's a better message than taking one that's a negative vote.
Mr. Nelson?
Madam Chair, a couple of things. I think we have voted recently on the accepting the guidelines. I don't know why we have to. It's the Ways and Means guidelines, not our guidelines. And Eric, once you say you're gonna hit a guideline, I don't care. Someone's gonna say, you said you were gonna do that,
Exactly.
and now you're coming in at this. I don't feel comfortable, especially tonight voting. If we need to take a vote on a guideline for some reason, I don't feel comfortable at all taking a vote tonight, because I don't know what you're gonna propose for your budget, and you've already said that. Plus, Mr. Murphy's not here. I don't think the committee should be taking any votes on guidelines without Mr. Murphy having an opportunity to vote. He's been attending subcommittee meetings, et cetera, and he should be here when this committee votes on a guideline, if we're gonna do it. So I would move that we table any potential approval of the FY21 budget guideline that's on our agenda to maybe our second meeting in January, and then we'll see where we are at that point in time, and we might need to table it again.
You're, through the chair, I think you're going to be getting a budget calendar probably at next meeting. And again, at some point in this process, it goes from a working budget to the school committee's budget. And so we're all going to go through that together. And so I think, so you will have the opportunity to sort of shape the budget moving forward, obviously, as you always do. So again, I think, to me, the guideline is just that. I think it's a starting point, and we can have that starting point. It's not going to say I can't unhear what I heard. I attended the meeting. I sort of know what people have said. I've been at all those meetings, and we're going to start our process sort of using the guardrails that have been established, and then look at some of the results. And I think when we get to very specific line item type of conversations that the school committee will be better informed to weigh in at that time. So I think,
So I
Well,
don't,
then I'll
I
move
don't
to
think,
table it
well, I don't
indefinitely.
think we have a vote on the table.
Well, there's a motion. I don't know if anybody
We
seconded
don't
it.
have a
We
motion,
don't
so
have
I
a
don't think we need to table a motion. So procedurally, I'm wondering if it sounds like we have a general sense that we're not, is there someone who would like to make a motion to vote on the guideline tonight? And if not, then I think we can wait until January. Does that sound okay with everyone? Okay.
Sure.
And
nobody-
I also would like to offer the Ways and Means Subcommittee an opportunity to speak. Mrs. Harrigan? Yeah. Or, okay.
I hear you totally about the assistant principals, and certainly we're gonna need a nurse as well. I'm anxious to see how the budget falls in as best we can to get to that 3.75 that we hope we can reach. But we're just gonna have to be flexible and see how things fall. Because your contract negotiations being open in process, it's hard right now to really know what you're gonna need. So I think we should just get the budget put together, maybe on the earlier side possibly even than we have in the past, and see where things fall, see what your priorities are. I agree with you, the assistant principals are a priority. We managed to get the middle school assistant principal into this year. Let's see where you stand, but that I understand, and I understand that your priorities might change as you speak to your principals and your department heads. It's not always so clear until you've had the staff have had a chance to speak up about what their needs are as well. So Frank Monaco last night said, as he said, this is a guideline. It's not set in stone. It's not, a regulation or a law. Let's just see how close we can get, and then we'll see where things go from there. Because of course, with contracts open, who knows really? And if things go sideways, we're going to have a talk. I mean, none of us can predict what the next few months are going to bring, and what information is going to come along as you're working to settle those contracts too. And who knows? You could even have unsettled contracts, right? And
Yeah.
we don't know. So. I think we should just get the information together as best and as quickly as we can, and then look at it from there.
Okay.
But we're hoping, obviously, to not hit all the way to 4 is high, probably too high. I don't think that would, I'd be worried that they would never agree to that. But if you need to go check over, it might be, to get that nurse or whatever that is a critical need. That's really the key, is what your critical needs are and how you feel. But I think it's a work in process, and it needs to be a work in process.
Mrs. Viraganti, did you want to add anything to that? No. Okay. All right. And Mr. Nelson?
Just a quick question. So historically, this department's been the only department in the town that's tried to build in negotiated settlements into our budget. Are we still the only department that does that?
Well, the town always has a negotiated settlement line as well.
That's a separate line item, though. It's not part of their
It's
percentage, correct?
It's multiple departments typically.
Yeah.
So where you've only got the one negotiated settlement line. They can negotiate without making it so, what's the word I'm trying to use? They have one negotiated settlement line for multiple contracts. So it's not always, they don't want to obviously give, you don't want to tip your hand, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, but I can remember in years past, just to pick a department, I hope no one gets mad at me, the police would come in at 3%, but that wouldn't include their negotiated settlement. That would be a separate line item somewhere else in the town's budget. So when people are comparing the school committees and we're talking about blended budgets and how come we're at 375 and the police are only at 3, it's because we're building in what we hope to settle the contracts at. So that's why our percentage is always greater than what's being recommended as a blended budget.
What I've seen, and I guess I've been on the committee for a really long time now. When they're in those negotiation years and the negotiated settlement isn't really in their budget, so to speak, they tend to come in way below. So, the town always is lower than you anyways, but they might come in at a 1.5 or 2% budget, knowing that negotiated settlements still need to be added in.
Yes.
You know, so that's typically what I've seen, is that it tends to be much lower. Sometimes you look at the budgets and think it's only like 1.5, how are they, but it's because
Yes,
the
exactly.
negotiated settlements are still floating.
That's right.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. So does anyone have any further comments tonight on the budget guidelines? So we'll revisit this after we see the budget, it sounds like, and
Well, again, I think we're not gonna wait, so we're
Yeah.
gonna do our work, and then you'll get a budget calendar, and we'll start the process. And then,
Okay.
I think as things become more concrete, we'll have a better idea.
Okay, so I'd like to move on.
Thank you.
The next item is old business. The wellness policy was presented last time, and tonight we are on a second reading unless someone has concern about that.
So thank you, Madam Chair.
Mm-hmm.
The Wellness Committee submitted a revised wellness policy for a first reading on November 17th. The newly revised policy is on the next 4 pages, and the current policy follows. Again, it's recommended the school committee adopt the revised wellness policy as
So
a
moved.
second reading.
Second.
Okay, any comment on this?
Good job.
Same here. Good job.
Yes, okay.
Very well done.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye. That's 400.
Okay, just
Thank
a point of information, we did pull out the concussion policy,
Mm-hmm.
and Sharon has printed off the full policy. I am reviewing that, going through that, and I'm getting more information, and I will probably in January revisit that with the committee as a full policy. I'm just not prepared to do that this evening, but we are working on it.
Okay.
Madam
Thank
Chair,
you. Yes.
new business?
Yes, please.
Revision of the proof of residency policy. I'm actually asking you to approve this on a first reading and not go to a second. This is request of Robin Miliano. Student Information Manager Robin Miliano is requesting 2 minor edits to the proof of residency policy. These edits will clarify terminology for new homeowners in Burlington and define the number of days a family moving within Burlington will need to verify a new residence. Edits to the policy are in red on the following page. The committee is being requested to make this revision tonight in order to facilitate student registration, in particular kindergarten registration, which will begin in January. We're having the open house in January. The proposed edits are in red on the following page, and I'm recommending that you bypass the typical first and second reading to do this. And again, we're just modernizing it, and we're seeing lots of families in Burlington who are selling their home and then buying a new home in Burlington. So there's lots of intra-town movement, and so I think Robin is just trying to keep track, and we want to set, I think it's a number of days where they need to give us, families need to give us their new address. So again, we're just trying to solve a problem, given what we have, and again, I think she just wanted to add something about a quitclaim deed in there as well, so.
Okay. Well, I want to
Madam
thank
Chair?
her for bringing this to our attention. That's good. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion, Madam Chair, that we adopt tonight the proof of residency policy with one requested modification, and that would be, no, we accept them all except for the request that in paragraph, it looks like where it says homeowners, subparagraph 1. It says your disclosure statement or quitclaim deed. I would ask that we delete your disclosure statement. Your disclosure statement contains personal financial information, and I don't think that we should be asking people to produce that. It contains the amount of your mortgage, the amount of taxes that they're being assessed. I just don't think we need to have that. A quitclaim deed is a public record. You can pull it off a website and prove that you own property. So I don't know why we need a disclosure statement, but everything else I'm fine with.
Okay, Mrs. Monaco?
I think what's going on is people sign P&S agreements on houses, and they have the disclosure statement prior to closing, right?
Well, you have to have it, you're supposed to have it 3 business days prior to the closing.
Yeah, so isn't this so that if someone buys a home and they're not gonna move in until the 15th of September, they can start school on the 7th of September? They don't have to wait? Isn't that the purpose behind this?
It is. We typically allow that exception anyway, but I think she was trying to find a way to allow families more flexibility by including that language.
Yeah, so I think what she's saying is if you've got the deed, great, just bring us the deed. But if you don't, and you don't mind showing us the disclosure, because it says or.
Well,
What about
kind of a
making it
bizarre
the,
hypothetical. I don't think that's gonna
what
happen.
if it's the purchase and sale agreement instead of the disclosure statement?
We don't own the property yet. We're gonna let
Yeah.
them in when
We
they,
always do.
well, I don't know.
No.
Is that the guideline? Your
Well-
PNS agreements fall apart all the time.
Yes,
Right,
I'd be
well,
You
concerned
know,
about
that's
that.
subject to fraud. I wouldn't do a PNS agreement.
Well, Mrs. Russo?
Can you redact that information from the disclosure statement and
We
still
could say a
have it
redacted
be,
disclosure statement.
and still have
Yeah.
it be valid?
This, to me, I also would like to say, I think it's an either-or. So someone could choose, anyone who was not comfortable with the disclosure statement could choose not to use that. If there was a way to say redacted or not redacted, because I'm not familiar with these documents, these legal documents, and obviously you know a
Yeah.
lot more about it.
Yeah.
But is it possible to have a disclosure statement that's redacted that would show, is that an option?
Actually, I just don't see any reason for it. I mean,
Well-
when you buy property, you pay a certain amount of money and there's a deed conveying the property to you.
But the
It's
deed
recorded
doesn't-
the same day at the
It is
registry of
recorded
deeds.
the same day?
Yes.
But
The
I-
bank won't give you any money if the deed doesn't go on record that day.
So if if I can follow this up, the disclosure statement would just allow someone to register their child 3 days earlier? Because that's
It's
when.
not even signed. The bank is supposed to give it to you 3 days before the closing. It's not even signed by anybody. I don't think
Does
that
that
proves
show
anything.
that you've purchased it?
No.
Can it fall apart between the disclosure statement
Yes.
and the deed?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair,
Okay,
just to make a
yes.
suggestion. My
Okay.
suggestion would be to take your acceptance of the policy with Mr. Nelson's exclusion of your disclosure statement, because I think the number of days for families to notify us if they change address was sort of the critical nature. I think also the quick claim deed. If Ms. Miliano says she can't live without something, Mr. Nelson, I will bring it back to you to
It'll have to be heavily redacted. before I
Exactly,
vote
give you
for
that,
it.
give you that reason, but I'm saying, I think she was just looking to have the number of days updated for kindergarten registration, which is coming up.
Yep.
And so, again, if there's a major problem, you'll see this again in January.
Okay.
So to clarify, we would be, in that paragraph that starts with homeowners, we would be having, please provide, number one, a quick claim deed, and number two, a homeowner's insurance policy or utility hookup receipt. Is that the way you mean it, Mr.
That would be
Nelson?
my motion, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
so that would be the motion. Okay.
Did
Mrs.
someone
Monaco?
second it? I'll
Oh,
second it.
second, sorry.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Can you tell me if someone's registering their child because they're about to move in a month?
Mhm.
What's our policy?
We don't have one. I usually,
You just override it and say, okay,
yeah, I don't want the kid to transition 3 weeks into school. That doesn't make sense to me, so.
yeah, okay.
So we always try
So
to do
this
what's-
won't really affect that? 'cause
do what's
that's
best for the
your
kid. Well, I think
discretion.
Robin is trying to give families more flexibility and process, and I think she's seen a growing number of people move-ins and move-arounds in Burlington. We've seen more transition the last few years.
Okay.
And so I think she's trying to accommodate that. Bless you.
Okay, any further comment on this then? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Opposed? The chair votes aye. That's 400. Thank you. Dr. Conti, out-of-state student and staff travel.
Out-of-state travel. Athletic Director Sean Hart has submitted out-of-state travel requests for the high school wrestling team and chaperones to travel to some wrestling meets this winter. I think on December 21st, we have the Thomas Chicanis Memorial Tournament in Hudson Falls, New York. On January 10th and 11th, we have the Eastern States Wrestling Classic in Loch Sheldrake, New York. On January 18th, we have the Coulter Abley Mid-Season Classic in Middletown, Connecticut. And on February 1st, we have the Capital City Classic in Concord, New Hampshire. The athletic department will pay all these expenses, and it's recommended that the school committee approve these out-of-state travel for the wrestling team.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
The chair, all those opposed, abstain, the chair votes aye. That's 400. Thank you.
Madam Chair, the Assistant Superintendent Larkin is requesting permission for the elementary, middle school principals to attend the Innovative Schools Summit. For the elementary and middle school principals to attend the Innovative Schools Summit in Orlando, Florida, March 26th through 29th. Again, attendance at training and educational events and conferences are designed to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of public service to enhance the knowledge and skills of public employees like principals. We do allow them every other year to attend typically a national conference. The anticipated cost will be covered by the curriculum instruction budget. Again, we count on this. It's recommended school committee approve out-of-state travel for the elementary and middle school principals to attend the Innovative School Summit in Orlando, Florida.
So moved.
Second.
Second?
Any conversation? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, the chair votes aye.
Thank
4-0.
you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Assistant Superintendent Larkin is requesting out-of-state travel approval for math coach Carrie Fortunato and math specialist Marie Murray and Jeff Para to attend the National Math Conference in Chicago, Illinois. Again, it's self-explanatory why they're attending the National Math Conference in Chicago. The expenses for the conference, again, this is part of our operating budget, will be paid for out of the elementary math coach's budget. It's recommended that the school committee approve out-of-state travel for Carrie Fortunato, Jeff Parrott, and Marie Murray to the National Math Conference in Chicago, Illinois.
So moved.
Any
Second? Yeah.
comment?
And I think just one thing, did Patrick want to add a teacher to that? There might be a teacher going as well, and I'm not sure the name, so again, I just want to make the committee clear, if we can fit it in, where we may add a teacher to that. So I just want
Okay.
folks to know that, and I'm sorry, Patrick said something to me and I forgot it. Superintendent Conti, that's me, is
Wait,
requesting.
so we didn't vote yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So that motion includes the potential for a teacher, correct? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, the chair votes aye, 4-0.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm requesting out-of-state travel to attend the National Superintendent's Conference in San Diego. Again, it's paid for out of the superintendent's budget. It is part of my contract to attend the National Superintendent's Conference, and I hope that you will support my travel.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, the chair votes aye, 4-0. I'm going to be good at this by the end of the night.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is the January town meeting warrant article approval. Warrant articles are approved in May. Typically, the capital warrants involve projects that are very specific. There's a estimated cost of those projects, as you know, and the money from those warrants can only be spent for the intention of the warrant, which is typically those projects. So an example listed here today, for instance, would be there was a warrant for new cafeteria tables at Marshall Simons Middle School. The warrant money could only be used to purchase cafeteria tables at the middle school. You've closed out accounts when you've seen, we've done that, purchased all the tables that we need. If there's additional money left, then we would typically, Nicole would make the recommendation, and we would close that out and we turn that money back to the general fund. We're in a situation where one of our warrant articles was underexpended and one of our warrant articles was overexpended. So what we're asking town meeting to do is to allow us to use the money from one warrant for the other warrant that was not included in the initial purpose. So I'll read it. If you have questions, we can certainly answer that. And Sue, we can answer that as well. We didn't bring it up last night just because I hadn't brought it up with the committee. I'm not sure it's going to require a vote prior to, but if it does, we can post a meeting prior to town meeting or something like that if you need that. So again, the school committee is being requested to submit a warrant article, and the warrant article has actually been submitted already because the deadline was last Friday, so Nicole met the deadline. To submit a warrant article for January town meeting to transfer funds of $11,576 from the Marshall Simons cafeteria tables approved in town meeting of May 2019 to the Pine Glen sewer pumps warrant article also approved in the May 2019. So by moving that number from amount from one to the other, again, this is we're not asking for any more money, we're just asking to transfer the money from one to the other. So again, I think it's relatively self-explanatory. I'm recommending that you approve the submission of this warrant article to town meeting for January for the transfer, again, of the $11,576 from the cafeteria warrant to the sewer pump
So moved.
warrant.
Second.
Okay, any
One quick question.
comment?
Is this
Yes,
enough
Mr.
money, Nicole, to pay for the sewer pumps? Once it's transferred over, will that be enough?
Yes.
To pay for them?
Yes.
Okay.
And my comment is that I'm really glad that our business office and our operations are on top of this so that we can do this transparently and make it clear where the money should go and where the money's being spent. And I'm very pleased that we're being asked to do this. Yes, Mrs. Russo, sorry.
No, that's okay. The sum of 11,576, was that all that was left with the the cafeteria tables, or was there more that we should expect to go back to the general fund?
So in the middle school cafeteria warrant, there was $12,438 remaining.
Okay.
The number that you see in the article is just the amount needed to cover
For the sewer.
for the sewer.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the second half of that is, so will we see another transfer back of the addition,
At future meetings,
At a future
we'll
meeting.
close out
Okay.
the warrants, just like we did that other time.
Got
and
it.
So we'll close them out as needed.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, chair votes aye, that's 400.
And
Thank
Ms.
you.
Harrigan, I know you're worried about it. I will be fully versed on sewer pumps by the time town meeting comes. If I need to explain why, all right. So just, I'll be ready.
All
If there are no
right,
questions, I'll be ready
yes.
to discuss sewer
Okay.
pumps.
You'll explain it.
All right, and the next item on the agenda is our athletic fields. We've been discussing this on and off, and I know that Mrs. Russo and Mr. Murphy and Mr. Cuna met with Brendan Regan and Brian Fucillo from the Tom Irwin Company about field maintenance for the rec department and the schools, since the rec department does the field maintenance for the schools as well. So if you could fill us in, I know you sent us a lot of information, but if you could maybe, one of you give a summary and see where we go with that.
You want to start? Maybe.
I noticed Dr. Conti left.
Good, keep going.
So, in previous meetings, it's been brought up in subcommittee meetings that Mr. Murphy and I believe Mr. Nelson had attended. I could be wrong with Mr. Nelson.
That's correct.
But what had happened is that the rec department had met with a consulting company, Tom Irwin, which had proposed the cost of what it would be to run 3 different types of treatments on our playing fields. A conventional, a hybrid, and organic treatment. We actually met, myself, Mrs. Russo, Mr. Murphy, Mr. Egan, and then Brian from the Tom Irwin Company, and discussed what that treatment was. The prices that we have, again, are in that packet. And the brief summary, there's roughly about $1,200 difference between a conventional treatment and an organic treatment. The committee has expressed concern that they do not want to look at conventional treatments and want to stay with an organic treatment on our fields. So the price that was proposed, roughly $12,550, like I said, is per acre. We have 3 fields in concern on the schools. That would be Marshall Simons, which has approximately 5 acres of playing fields, Memorial School, which has approximately 3 acres of playing fields, and Francis Wyman, which has approximately 4 acres of playing fields. Now, again, we're early in this conversation, but of course, the reason that we're talking about the numbers is that that $12,550 is per acre, as I already stated, and with approximately 12 acres of playing fields on the school properties, you can see how quickly that number escalates if we try to treat all of those with an organic property. So that's the brief summary of where we're at right now. The next part of the equation would have to be if we're able to fund all of that in conjunction with the rec department. And if we're not able to fund all of that, when I say we, the town of Burlington, whether it be the rec department and or the school department, if we're not able to fund all of that, to do all 12 acres, it would be deciding which fields we would have to pick first. to treat. So, again, that's the brief summary. I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of questions, but again, we're just having these preliminary meetings. So I'll probably have to take some of your questions back and get some more answers.
Mrs. Russo, would you have any additional information for us about the meetings and what you got from it?
So with regard to the cost, I'm just looking for that paper. There's also other costs associated. They talked about the aeration's in here, but the mowing, the lining, the prepping of the fields, debris, cleanup prior, after. So there's also other costs that are not being shown in this proposal that the rec department is paying for through their own help. Much of what they're doing is being outsourced right now. They are learning more and training more in-house to do this. They said there's recognized savings that would be passed on with our programs also as they get trained too, but we wouldn't see it from what I wrote for 3 years. If that, is that, just want to verify what my.
Yeah, again, I will agree with you. So our rec department would be doing the cutting, and they are looking to purchase an aeration machine. So right now, they wouldn't have the full capabilities of that. So as Mrs. Russo's statement, my understanding is the same as hers, that the prices quoted would include having outsourcing some of the work done. And then as we built up the capabilities in-house with the rec department, we would see some of that reduction in cost come down.
Okay. So, does anyone have questions? Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. Bob, have there been any preliminary discussions with Recreation as to what percentage of the cost for the schools fields they would want us to try to fund? I mean, they're responsible for maintaining the fields, obviously. It's been the tradition here in Burlington for 100 years, probably. And traditionally, they've paid all of the cost of maintaining the fields. And if my math is correct, if it's $12,550 per acre for the wholly organic program, that's $150,000 a year. So are they looking to fund that in a certain percentage, or have you had any of those discussions at this point?
I'd like to ask a clarifying question
Surely.
related to your question, if you don't mind. It says $12,550 times 12 acres for the organic, but the difference between the conventional and the organic, you said, was $1,200. Is that per acre?
Correct.
Okay. And also, we're not even talking about the hybrid, which is not as expensive as the organic and not as inexpensive as the conventional. So we're talking about $1,200 difference per acre, so times 12, right? So that would be in the $15,000 difference, not $150,000 difference.
No, I'm not talking
Okay.
about difference. I'm talking
You're
about
talking
the
about the full
total,
amount.
total
Yeah.
cost if we were to go with the fully organic.
But that would
program.
only be $15,000 more than if we go with the conventional.
Can I just
Okay,
comment
so
on that?
so I apologize for interrupting your question, but I want to be sure we're talking about the same number of acres or whatever. Go ahead.
So these are a new proposal, so these are new numbers. These
Mm-hmm.
are not the current proposed, like, this is not what is happening on our fields currently. So I know what you just said, that the difference between the conventional and the organic is a difference of approximately $1,200. That's
Mm-hmm.
true. But we're talking about a new take-on cost of $12,550 to treat our fields. And what the rec department and we have had is, again, just preliminary, so we don't have a full understanding of what the funding is. But we have been told that it is underfunded currently to support the full 12 acres and all of the town's acres at these rates. So we would have to make some decisions as to which ones would be the higher priorities, and the town would have to do that as well, too, if we were to choose these programs.
Okay. And so, Mr. Nelson, if you want to repeat your question, I feel like I can understand the answer to it better, so go ahead.
Well, maybe I'm trying to find out what commitment Recreation is expecting from the school department I don't have a problem paying to maintain our fields. We're trying to get the fields into a safer condition, weed-free. I've seen what they've done up at the Wildwood Park, and it's remarkable. It's remarkable what's happened over there in a very short period of time, and I'd like to see that happening at our field. So I wouldn't have a problem, as a committee person, supporting some contribution towards one of these programs. I don't care which one we ultimately adopt, well, I do care, but there's a difference in cost, obviously, depending upon which one we adopt. So I'm just wondering if maybe we should invite somebody from the recreation to come and talk with us, or maybe we'll have another subcommittee meeting, and Tom and I can sit down with them and talk to them about it. But you haven't heard anything, Bob, have you?
No, again, the meeting was literally just last week.
Yeah.
And we did not have a full report on what the town is currently spending on our fields as it is.
Yeah.
So to find out that difference is something that, I'll have to get and then report back to the committee.
Okay.
Mrs. Monaco?
Going all the way back in time to when I was the school committee rep on the rec department. And it was at that time that they brought in someone from Marblehead, I believe, who was a consultant. And it was to make all of the fields, theirs and ours, all organic. And I was thrilled with that because I have some experience with a crazy husband that does all organic growing. And only whatever happened, the program sort of didn't work out real well, and not enough money was budgeted for the stuff, and not enough money was budgeted for the manpower, and some of it had to be, done by outside, and really it didn't work out. So the fields kind of deteriorated. And I understand what they've done in the fields that they control, which is like Wildwood and wherever else it is. However, the school fields, which they also take care of, or always have taken care of, we did not agree to their new program, which includes some, synthetic fertilizers, weed killers, et cetera, et cetera. I suppose it isn't the end of the world to use some of those products, but I'm very uneasy about it. I think, I have a daughter who has thrown out every piece of plastic in her kitchen. Everything, all her containers of glass. It's, as we learn more and more about what various chemicals do, whether they're the causes of various illnesses, et cetera, as we get more sophisticated in that knowledge, we learn things. And I think one of the things that I've learned, that I feel somewhat confident about, is that using poisonous chemicals, even if they're supposedly gone in a matter of days, or, absorbed into the ground, and you really don't get affected by them, I'm skeptical. And I would like to use organics on the school fields that are under our control. Not trying to tell the rec what to do with their fields, but ones that are under our control, I would be a lot more comfortable using all organics. So what I had said when I attended the walkthrough of the various parks was that I would, as Steve said, I would not be opposed to contributing from the school budget to some delta in what it would cost to take care of our parks, our fields, with organics. So I don't know if they have looked at different vendors, if everyone has the same price, if there's a Best Buy, with a different person. I don't know if they want us to go off on our own and do them ourselves. It's always been part of the rec's overall work that they do the fields. So I'll just end it by saying my preference would be to stay with organics, to bring in a program that will really work and make our fields look good and be safe and smooth and green, and I would like to pursue that with the rec department, even if it means budgeting some money to help out with it. But I don't think that we should be necessarily taking over, paying for all of the care that we have, that has always been in their budget rather than ours.
Anyone else want to add to that before I speak? Yeah, go ahead.
With regard to the budget, even the conventional, we're looking at $134,000. They do not have anywhere near that in their budget. So it honestly doesn't matter which one we decide at this point. I think right now the bigger issue is the funding and how that's going to go forward too. Because from the numbers they threw out, it's not even close to providing for a conventional, the cheapest program here. So I'm not sure really even how that would work out, going down the road with the money. The delta between the two for 12 fields is 16,000 as in that ballpark. But I have the feeling that's not going to be the issue. The issue is how do we implement these fields? So even if we went with the lowest and just did one field, there's still not enough money in that budget. So I think that discussion of the funding needs to happen. I completely agree with Chris on the organic. I just wanted to mention that this company, we did talk about, you can find companies that can be cheaper. He is proven. He does all organic for a number of towns. He talked about the playing field that my kids at our school that I teach at is organic, and it's gorgeous. It's great. So you could check out that field that we have up at in the next town over too. So I do think, yes, we might be able to get a cheaper price. I'm not sure how much cheaper, but I do think that this company is a well-respected company, and I do think they are proven with organics, and that's very important to have that knowledge and that ability to do an organic program well and understand the history of how to do it over that time.
So my comment is that I actually thought we were in a really different position. When I met with them, whenever it was in the fall, we went out and looked at the fields. It was my understanding that REC has been doing organic for a number of years. I don't know exactly how long. That REC has been doing, our fields in a certain way. There may not have always been quite the amount of product that was ideal, but that's my understanding. So the idea that there's this additional cost of all of it, it doesn't make any sense to me. So given everyone else's, I don't feel like I need you to explain it again to me tonight. I feel like we need more information. What I'd like to know more is what were they doing and what additional would this involve? Because I thought they were already doing organic, and what they told us at the fields is that they were doing organic, and then on Wildwood they used some synthetic materials, so there was a hybrid they were introducing. So my first question is, what were they doing with the school fields? And then my second question is, I'm more interested in knowing not about what the difference between conventional and organic, but they talked about a hybrid where they were mostly using organic, but occasionally using a spot chemical or whatever, and how that would work. Again, with the concern about the safety of the fields because of kids tripping if there's holes where the weeds were or whatever. And so, and then the third thing is when I got this report, I went through to figure out, well, what's different between the hybrid and the organic? What are they using? And the products, which I still don't know a lot about. I have a list now that I made myself, but I'd like to know a little more about, under the organic. They said they use something called Replenish and granular product application and GrubGon, and then compared with the hybrid, which was using 4 other ones. So if you could get answers to some of that and let us know more about it in the future, maybe it could even be done in writing, and, you know, you can, I just think we need more information, and I don't think any of us are ready to make a decision about it tonight. So is everyone comfortable with
Sure.
completing this conversation now?
I don't think there's any rush.
And, you know, the rush is the new season, and if we could make a decision before then, that would be ideal. It also, if we can decide if it does need to impact our budget, that would be ideal. We'd like to know soon, in time to do that. But otherwise, I just feel we need more information. And I appreciate you looking into it, and if the little group of you that we're meeting with rec could continue, that'd be great, and you can look into. Is that okay with you guys? Okay. All right, thank you. So that was the last item on the agenda. Is there anyone here for public participation? Okay, and if no one has any other agenda items, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, I apologize, Ms. Kasha, yes.
Could I just clarify
Yes.
something that was discussed earlier in the meeting?
Sure.
I just want to make sure that everyone's understanding is the same.
Okay.
Ms.
Which-
Nelson, when you brought
Which
up,
topic are we?
when Mr. Nelson had brought up the negotiated settlement line of the town,
Okay,
and so I think the way that Ms. Harrigan explained it was that while it's not included in, say, an unsettled contract for police isn't included in the police line, the negotiated settlement line of the town is still included
I
in their
understand, yeah.
overall. Okay,
That's a good point.
Okay.
The public might not understand, though. They might be comparing, for example, the police budget, and it's only 1.5%, as Susan was saying. And
Yes.
we're 3.75. It's because they separate it out when they're doing the percentage increases in the individual budgets.
Yes.
But you're right. It's-
okay.
it
I
is
just
in
wanted to
there.
make sure we were
It
on the
is in
same
there.
page.
It is, yeah.
Okay. That's all,
Okay.
thanks.
good, thank you for that clarification.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Yes. Second? All those, any comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? The chair votes aye. Thank you all.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.